Sometimes an understanding silence was better than a bunch of meaningless words. You're listening to AMI Audiobook Review. I'm Jacob Szymanski here with Ramya and I,
Hey.
technical producer Nisreen Abdel-Majid, and today we're going to be talking about Archer's Voice by Mia Sheridan. We're actually going to be reviewing it, can you believe it? And that was
Properly.
the source of the quote that I just read, which isn't that so true? How often are words meaningless?
And how often do we actually sit in meaningful silence? Like, come on. Barely anymore, I find.
It's a very intimate thing if you're just standing there with someone and you're perfectly comfortable being silent. And it's not awkward. You just allow it. I also really appreciate silence in conversations where if you're having a very meaningful conversation, you both take the time to just stop and think.
Yep.
I love that. That just shows that you're both engaged.
Absolutely.
They say that the best people to communicate with is the ones that you're comfortable being in silence with.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
it's true. And, it's just time for us to reflect, to digest, to actually just be there, to be present. And I just love this quote in the way that it says it, very simply.
Mm-hmm. And in Archer's Voice, the one of the main characters is mute. So it kind of plays into this quote of like appreciating the silence, and you can still say 1,000 words while not actually saying anything. So what are we talking about today? Archer's Voice by Mia Sheridan is a New York Times best-selling romance about the transformative and healing power of love. Seeing as romance is not one of Ramya or I's typical go-to genres, this was a bit of a different read for both of us. Do you agree, Rams?
Yeah, totally.
Bit interesting. Alia Abdel-Majid, the person who initially brought our attention to this one, is with us today for an honest, in-depth review. If you recognize that family name, that's because she's none other than our technical producer, Nisreen Abdel-Majid's sister.
Hooray.
Yeah, and later on, rapid fire review veteran Greg David is here to show us how it's done. But right now, Alia, welcome.
Hi, how's it going?
Alia, we've been trying to get you on the show for the longest time. Like,
So
since its
too
inception. Way too long. And it's nobody's fault but Nisreen's, right?
Yep, of course.
For sure.
Blame me. Blame the victim.
Oh, yeah. I didn't realize how busy my life was until we were trying to book this.
Oh, I know. Well, we got to squeeze you in somehow.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's not waste any time with you. All right. Before we get into this review, I want to read a quick synopsis so that everybody knows what exactly we're talking about here. All right, here's the synopsis. When Bree Prescott arrives in the sleepy lakeside town of Pelion, Maine, she hopes against hope that this is the place where she will finally find the peace she so desperately seeks. On her first day there, her life collides with Archer Hale, an isolated man who hides a secret of his own. A man no one else sees. Archer's Voice is the story of a woman chained to the night of one horrifying night. The man whose love is the key to her freedom. It is the story of a silent man who lives with an excruciating wound and the woman who helps him find his voice. It is the story of suffering, fate, and the transformative power of love. And here's a quick sample of the audiobook.
I had stopped at a small internet cafe in New York the day before and looked online for rental properties in the town where I was headed. The town in Maine I had chosen as my destination was a popular tourist attraction, and so after more than an hour of searching, the closest I could get was across the lake, in this small town named Pelion. After drying off, I put on a pair of clean shorts and a t-shirt, and picked up my phone to call my best friend, Natalie. She'd called me several times since I'd first texted her and told her I was leaving, and I'd only texted her back. I owed her an actual phone call. "Bree?" Nat answered, the sounds of loud chatter in the background. "Hey, Nat, is this a bad time?" "Hold on, I'm going outside."
That was a clip of Archer's Voice by Mia Sheridan, played back with the permission of Hatchet Audio. I can hear the eye roll from you, Rams, that line, the transformative power of love. Keep it down,
I've said
okay?
it several times already, and I'm tired from rolling my eyes.
Do you feel transformed by the love in this book?
Stop it. You do not want to ask that as the first question of our honest, in-depth review of this book, do we?
All right, before we get started, I just want to set the rules. For the first half of this review, we'll just keep it spoiler free.
Set the rules. Oh, okay. Yeah.
Spoiler free for a little bit, and then once we give the go ahead and a good warning, we can start actually talking about some
Okay.
spoilers and what happens near the end. So, one by one, let's go around the table and just really quickly, what's your short version of your thoughts on this book? Alia, do you want to go first?
Sure. First of all, I do agree with Ramya about love in this book. It's very cliche.
Yeah.
And as much as I love romances in a book, I'm not really fond of it in real life. So,
Oh,
What?
it's getting deep.
yeah, so I totally get that. I'm always like rolling my eyes and like, who thought of this, you know? But regardless, I did love this book. I've read it 3 times already.
Oh, wow.
Uh,
Oh.
Despite that,
yeah,
wow.
yeah, I know, right? The first time I read it, the first thought I had was so original, you know? You'll find like, boy meets girl and, there's some certain tropes to it and whatever, but this one, like the fact that he was mute and she already knew sign language, it was just such a sweet story.
Yeah, it
Mm.
was unique.
Yeah, it was pretty unique in that sense. And I love me some small town romances, so it worked out for me.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of us love the small town romances, or at least romance loving fans, because it gives you a lot to play with, right? Like the type of person that comes into the small town, the type of person that they run into, the irony of two people who are so opposite to each other, trying to work out in a way, but yet connecting so deeply. I think these kind of things are what make for the roller coaster ride, if you will, of a romance.
Mhm.
Mm.
Yeah.
So Ramya, what are your
Oh, I thought it was
quick
avoiding that question.
version?
All right. I thought this book was entertaining. I didn't have too much of a deep experience with it. I did particularly uh enjoy is not the word, but I did acknowledge throughout the book the representation of disability, aka Archer, with him not having a voice,
Yeah.
the injuries that left him not being able to speak, as well as sign language, the deaf culture. There was a lot of great insight and acknowledgement of deaf culture in the book. So I appreciated that on a deep level, a sincere level, and I think the author did very well going into that with this aspect.
Hmm.
But in terms of the romance, my goodness, I found it to be very typical romance. In terms of the characters, in terms of side characters and settings, and even just the storyline. But we will pull apart their storyline because I did have some favorite moments.
I understand, Rems. What made I only rolled my eyes when I was reading the synopsis. I did finish the book, but when I was reading the synopsis and I read the line, "The man whose love is the key to her freedom,"
Yeah.
I was like, blah.
Where have I not
like,
heard this
what?
before? Yeah.
But I really did love the storyline. As you said, Rems, they were inclusive to talking about disability
Mm,
and also bringing her trauma. I know it
true.
can be
actually.
relatable to a lot of people. And so for their backstories, it really connected them. And it was it was a lovey-dovey type of book, although I'm not going to say what characters' names, but there were some characters that annoyed me.
Questionable.
But yeah, questionable is the word. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. But overall, I enjoyed it.
Yeah. And wait, can I add one more note because you mentioned it,
Yeah.
Niz? The trauma and PTSD representation of that and very real examples for people, I think were thoughtful also. And I think for me, the themes that I particularly hang on to from this book are not necessarily the romance, but the sadness. There were great sadness in this book
Mhm.
that I
Especially like before they fully help each other,
yes.
right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And we read the
Yeah.
synopsis, but the synopsis was very vague. So just to give you a better idea what the actual plot is about, it's a character, Bree, that in an attempt to heal after trauma, she travels to this beautiful lakeside town, Pelion?
Alien.
Yeah, and while she's there, she discovers this enigmatic mute man that lives alone. He's a bit of a recluse, a bit of an outcast, but they find that they both connect on a number of things and eventually fall in love and help each other heal from both their respective traumatic experiences.
You
My,
didn't give us your thoughts.
oh my God, yeah, that's true.
Nice
I'm too
try.
selfless.
Nice try.
We've got to hear it.
I thought it was, I think Ramya said it well. It was entertaining, very cheesy at times, an easy read, like very cozy.
Mm-hmm.
I really enjoyed like the first half of the book actually, and then it kind of went downhill after that point. Not exactly the deepest experiences, but I did find that the two main characters' chemistry and scenes together were generally pretty good. It's everything like surrounding it that was occasionally like very cheesy. So entertaining, cheesy, not very deep, but like I could recommend this to some people. So mixed feelings.
You said easy read, and I think that makes sense. I think that sums it up to a lot of people where they don't want to kind of think too much about a book. So I think it is cozy. It is an easy read. It's something that you kind of just read through, and it's not something to overthink. And I think a lot of the times that's what I need.
If anything, you don't want to overthink it because then it falls apart.
Yeah.
All right. I want to ask you guys positive aspects of this book that you really enjoyed. Alia?
So I really love the fact that, and I think it shouldn't be that deep, but it is that she didn't judge him at the beginning, right? Like, and I know that's so typical, like in a in this type of these type of romance books where, like I'm not any other girl, I'm just, one of a kind. But I just love that she heard some things from like other people about him, and the first thought she had was, no, I want to get to know him, and
Yeah.
like I know in real life, you know what, we judge people so easily, and I find that like in this book it's just so I don't know, I found it so sweet that she didn't,
Yeah, it was like it was a really good example of saying, I need to hear the other side of the story because everyone was
Exactly.
so judgmental and
Mhm.
quick to make assumptions. But she was just like, no, like I want to figure out more about this person. Just like on a whim, just goes to visit to be like,
Yeah.
yo, what's up, dude?
Yeah.
And their first meeting was kind of awkward, but also a bit endearing.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Their interactions have they left marks during the read. I think I enjoyed his transformation. Like we're poking fun at the line about his what was it? His heart being the transformation. Anyways, but he obviously went from being completely isolated, minus any kind of need to get in society moments like going shopping or having to interact with people because he has to pay them. Everything else was really just solo endeavors for him. He didn't even have his uncle who used to help him with things and raise him. But I particularly liked that we got to see how he was taking small steps into society through her help and through her guidance. But Archer was, showing up at the coffee shop, but that was a big move. Before that, there were subtle things, right? Like he was willing to cut his hair. He was willing to go meet her. He was willing to leave the gate open for her to come see him. And these were all, obviously huge points for him to try to let somebody in like her, but also just let himself be in society. And I can imagine, like, we didn't get into too much of the detail through the writing, but I can imagine something like that for a person is just overwhelming, to say the least.
Yeah, I thought
Mhm.
Archer was an interesting character because he's very atypical for the main romantic interest in a romance book. He's not
Yeah.
charismatic. He doesn't have a crazy job or
Mhm.
anything like that. He is ridiculously attractive, but I mean that's kind of par for the course. I would expect nothing less.
Yeah. All the guys
For
were
sure.
so ridiculously
Yeah.
attractive.
Yeah, he has an not a 6-pack, an 8-pack.
Okay.
Holy crap. And he does that through masonry just because he loves gardening and like doing
Yep.
yard work. Well, what
It's
a
realistic,
beast.
Jacob. Come on.
Yo, it's fine.
Very,
It is
very
fantasy.
realistic.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
realistic. I really enjoyed how cozy the book was. And like I said earlier, like the first half is just her showing up to this town and everyone is so nice.
Who's the
the
neighbor?
yeah, the neighbor is so nice. He just invites her
The
over, gives her
grandma.
free stuff. Oh yeah, take my bike. Fine, no problem.
Loved her.
She is so nice. And the
By far
people
my
in
favorite
town
character.
too, like she makes friends within like a day. She gets invited to go out, go to the beach.
Yeah.
It's a small town vibe and you really feel that. Everyone at the diner is just so friendly and everyone gets along. Even the characters that aren't exactly the nicest, they're not like horrible people. They're just kind of like
No.
misguided.
People
you
come
know?
around, actually.
Yeah, they come around. They're not evil. They're just like
No.
kind of dumb.
Alia, did you notice that, like, because you read a lot of romance, right? There were times
Mhm.
where I was like, oh, she's making friends with these two girls, but they're gonna bite her in the back, or like I was
Yeah.
really waiting for the other shoe to drop in a lot of scenarios. I was like, oh, that guy, the cousin, I can't remember his name right now. Travis, yeah, I was like, oh, Travis is gonna do something so sketch, which he does. But at the end, there were a
Oh,
lot of
yeah.
like actual endearing scenes and life-saving scenes that included him being a enormous, how do you say it, like a hero, like heroing acts from
Mhm.
him. There were other parts too, but anyways, did you think that those were atypical to regular romance novels?
Um, for small town, I feel like that's a very typical thing
Oh yeah,
for
okay.
my small town romances. Like, I noticed, like, you find friends so fast, it's like a group of girls that have known each other since birth, and then they see this new girl and they're like, okay, you're part of our pack
Aw,
now. And I'm like, I wish that's in real life, but
right?
apparently
Yeah, I
there's a
was waiting
lot
for
of
Mean
things,
Girls moments to
Yeah,
happen.
I was a bit salty
right?
at how easily she made friends. I
Right?
was like, no way.
That's my exact thought. I was like,
I
why
was
can't I
waiting for
make friends that fast?
jealousy.
Me too. It was
Yeah.
like, oh, we're gonna find out that
Yeah.
somebody has history, and it's
Hmm.
gonna,
And
yeah,
And you know what? That's what I liked about this book, that there wasn't really much about that.
yeah,
Because it's so typical, like, oh, like, get away from him, he's my like boyfriend or
right.
whatever, even though they've never even dated or,
Yeah.
like all that. I'm like, it's so typical, like just stay away from that. Let's all stand together.
Mm-hmm. Even how quickly Bree, the protagonist,
Hmm.
brings Archer's name into conversation. Like she pretty much immediately, as soon as she started to catch feelings for him, right, or feel
Hmm.
like this was something serious, she made that clear to people around her, including Travis, including the other girls, her friends. Um, but I thought she would wait a little longer because this guy was so isolated and not out there, and I thought maybe she'd be more unsure of talking about him so casually and bringing him up so
Yeah.
casually in context, but nah.
Well, I think what made all the difference was that she could speak sign language. And she was pretty much the only person in town that was able to
Yes.
effectively communicate with them.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
that made a
That's true
huge
too.
difference.
Yeah.
Hmm. So, in terms of things you guys didn't like about the book, let's get into this. Alia?
Yeah, I don't want to really spoil anything, but
You can. It's the spoiler time now.
Yep, exactly.
oh,
We
it's a
can spoil
spoil.
now.
Okay,
Spoiler time.
perfect. Okay. Well, first, I know I said I read this book 3 times, and I did, but I want to clarify. The first time I read it, I loved it from beginning to the end. And then it's a comfort book, right? Like, I just kind of go back to it whenever I don't have anything else to read. So those other 2 times, I realized the flaws in them.
Mm.
And like, one thing for sure is I really hated the fact that I appreciated why he did it, but I just really hated the fact that he just left without any word, nothing. Like, he didn't say anything, he didn't tell her.
Yeah.
And like, I understand he wants to, find who he is. I get that, but at the same time, like, you could tell her, she's been supportive with you like the whole time.
I feel like she would have
Um
understood,
Exactly,
right?
yeah, and she was just so heartbroken. It's like you could have just called, or I guess texted, saying, "Okay, I just left," or, "I'm just gonna come back in a couple of months," or whatever. But he took a while. Like, I thought it was only gonna be a couple of weeks, but it was a couple of months, I believe, right?
Yeah.
I That was just so like
Yeah, but a couple
that.
of
Yeah,
months of like 100% ghosting, like no
yeah,
contact whatsoever. What if he came back and she found another guy? What an idiot.
exactly. Yeah. And she just kind of accepted him right when he came back, and that was Like, I was like, really? Like, you could have
What
let
a
him grovel
pushover.
a bit more,
Yeah,
you
that's
know?
what
Yeah,
annoyed
exactly.
me.
Let him grovel.
Exactly,
All
yeah.
right, Rams, go off.
There was a lot. I thought that so much was glorified. And, we
Mhm.
know that this is a, sorry to say, but, cookie cutter,
Mhm.
small town romance. So, it comes with the flourishing of this and flourishing of that. And that's the way that it's written, right? Short, quick, cozy, as you've said multiple times already, Jacob, type of read. You know what you're
Mhm.
expecting. But nonetheless, because I have not read a book like this in years, in this genre, typically, I thought that, my goodness, we are spending so much time on their um, sexual encounters, or like, yeah, like it was, basically erotica at
There's
some
a ton
points.
of smut.
Ton. And just the glorification of stuff like that, because we talk about like what's realistic and how things are represented in books and on TV, et cetera, for people, for women, for whatever. And I thought that like there was a lot of that kind of just going back to as we know it, or as it should be portrayed kind of attitude. Same
Mm.
thing with, reconciliation. Like their reconciliation, I thought was like eye roll worthy as well, because they get into conflicts. There's all this stuff going on, and it's pretty deep, guys. Like there's so much, within the characters. There are a lot of complexities that we've explored. Their disability, for example, the trauma, for example. Like we've already mentioned a bunch through
Mhm.
this conversation, and yet when it came down to reconciliation, they did it and they made it happen, and they made a family and all this stuff. And I was thinking, can we pause? Like we could have extended just the second half of this book into two other books and explore why it didn't work out and make this into a tragedy.
It was a bit uncomplicated, and really, you would have wanted it to be a tragedy?
I know,
How
I'm a
Shakespearean.
little
Holy
extra,
smokes.
sorry, on the other end of
Can,
the spectrum.
Wow. Happily
can
ever
I
after is not your
Nah,
thing, eh?
nah, come on, seriously, they really got into it. Okay, sorry, carry on.
can I just add on to what you just said?
Mm.
Um, I completely get you. There was a lot of steamy scenes. But the thing is that especially when you're taking recommendations from like Book Talk or
Yeah,
Bookstagram, okay, all of them have such steamy scenes and
definitely.
way more than Archer's Voice, I have
Oh,
to say.
definitely. And we
Yeah,
know
it's
Oh,
like the
okay.
popularity of, what are we calling it now?
yeah,
Erotica?
Smut.
Smut? Is that
a
the official term?
spicy
Yeah,
Spicy?
spice.
scenes,
Guns
yeah.
and
Yeah.
Roses, I think my friend calls it. Anyways, whatever.
Yeah,
There's so
it's a
much.
lot. It's
Exactly. But
yeah.
for women, very popular genres.
Yeah.
Totally, totally. I just think that there
100%. And
is kind of nuanced ways to represent sex in these books. And
yeah.
this was not it. This was, again, the cookie cutter, the typical. Like, we
Yeah.
need to put A, B, C, D into this because that's what creates a romance.
Yeah. And I think that also gives high expectations to the women that are reading this.
Yeah.
And like they're going to be expecting that, this is how a romance is, this perfect little, as you said,
Mm,
cookie cutter romance. I'm not like that as a
right,
romance
right.
reader.
But it's
The whole
true.
time I'm like, this is not true.
This is not true.
This is
But
very
also,
fake.
like, when I say glorification, it's like that, right? It was
Hmm.
his first time, I think,
Hmm.
and she was experienced, and yet they were having all these very ideal experiences. And, it goes back to that question of, like, what are we putting down for
Yeah.
expectations of readers?
The only thing I liked about that is that the fact that he's inexperienced,
Yeah,
because
and nervous
all of
about
these
it.
typical romances or any book, honestly, it's like he's the one who's experienced and she isn't,
True.
and like how
Typical
many guys
Oh,
have you
okay.
been
romance.
with, and he gets angry and like things like that. But this book, it's like he's that one who's actually inexperienced, so it's perfect
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah, that
You
was
don't see
nervous
that
laughter, by
often.
the way. Yeah, definitely. Alia, you make a really good point, honestly. And I think that came out in a lot of the book where, she's the one who brings him out into society. She's the one who plays the more fearless character compared to
Hmm.
him being
She
more
definitely
timid
takes
or.
the initiative more
Yes,
often than
yes,
not.
exactly.
And I actually
Hmm.
think this is something that I didn't quite like about the book, is that it kind of falls into the I can fix him relationship trope,
Mhm.
where I think it's really harmful. It's not just a book trope. It's just like a
Mm-hmm.
relationship issue that people fall into, where you think that you can just like fix someone.
Mhm.
And I think it's harmful that it was represented in this book, although it wasn't like egregious or anything like that.
No.
But she like encourages him to go out with Travis and his friends, and it's really awkward. And she
And then gets
encourages him to
mad
like
when he
dress
comes back
better
from the
to come
strip
out. Yeah,
club.
it gets
Yeah.
mad. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just like
Yeah.
I,
That's
I,
just typical romance, Jacob.
yeah.
Come
Well,
on.
maybe it's not my thing, but no, I had a
Yeah.
lot of fun with this book.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned that when Travis brings Archer to the strip club, that was actually
Oh
a
God.
really like the scene itself was very painful to read because it was just super awkward. But I thought the conflict that it set up was one of the best parts of the
Yep.
book, in my
100%.
opinion, because
Mhm.
it was really true to all the characters. Like Travis was bringing Archer to a club, but didn't specify that it was going to be a strip club, knowing full
Mhm.
well that it would make a rift between Bree and Archer,
Yeah.
and Archer wanted to go because he wanted to be more traditional, more like your typical
And he wanted to
like
impress
young guy, you
Bree
know. Yeah, I wanted to impress
Mhm.
Bree.
and trusted that she would know that he would need this. But
Mhm.
also there was a lot of like internal conflict he was having about the physical urges versus mentally not wanting what was happening around him, and then having to have the alcohol kind of mm, numb things for him. Right? There was a lot going
Mhm.
on there actually. And I thought it was written well as well.
Yeah, it was
That
great
scene. Yeah.
because it made like all three of those characters were okay with the situation initially, but it basically backfired on all three of them in
Yeah.
a way that was like really, really
Except
good.
Travis. Travis was a snake there.
Well,
Yeah.
I'd argue that it backfired because Archer and Bree ended up reconciling.
Oh yeah, no. I was
Mhm.
just saying that it what did you say? Like they all had good intentions or whatever, but
They
not
went
Travis.
into it with they went into it with good well, okay,
Not
yeah, you're
Travis.
right. Yeah,
Are you
Travis
kidding
is
me?
not good intentions at all,
No.
no.
Well, this is fantabulous.
Yeah.
We
Oh,
really got into it.
one more thing since we're talking about spoilers, the end where Archer takes a literal bullet to protect Bree?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, come on. That
Nah.
was too much.
And then the
They
fake out
stretched
death.
it so hard.
So
The
bad.
fake out
The fake out death
death.
was dumb.
I was
Oh, my
livid,
Lord.
Alia. Livid that they would put that in. I was like,
Look,
why?
let me tell you. 1 out of 10 books. Okay, is I'll take a bullet for you.
Well, there
and all
should
that,
be a
and they
section
do.
of spoiler alerts.
Honestly, oh yes.
Stop it. There should be a
Honestly.
section of, these are the books you don't want to read because this is what they add at the end to fake out the death,
Just-
or this was a
just,
dream, or oh my gosh, get out of here.
I would assume you wouldn't like mafia romances then.
Mm-mm. Fake out deaths they're the bane of my existence.
Yeah.
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 It's just when you think the book has like some sort of meaningful consequence, they just remove
They just
all
come back.
They just remove all consequences. Like everything
The
that's
way-
like consequential, no.
The way that they
Forget about it.
wrote it too, it was like he was actually properly dead.
Yeah.
I hate that too. Yeah.
Ugh.
And the writing was occasionally very bad.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sometimes I was like, what is going on? I literally don't know where these people are, what they're saying. Like, I'm just confused. And it's weird because at times it was very easy to follow. And then other times, like, I'm literally like, but you were just in the living. How did you get here? Are you riding your bike or are you in a car? I'm
I
confused. What
know.
are you doing?
That
Yes,
dog too.
I agree.
Anybody notice that dog got left alone at home a lot?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And anybody noticed that the neighbor had like a heart attack? The ambulance came and then
Yeah.
was never addressed
Okay,
again.
now
Is
we're
she
just
okay?
squeezing in like our last pet
No, I
peeves before
believe-
we leave.
I believe at the end they mentioned the neighbor, if I remember
Oh, did she?
I
correctly.
think so.
Oh,
yeah,
I
she made it out.
so.
She was fine.
But still,
Yeah.
it was like very like quick filler kind of thing. Like, oh, she's good or whatever. I don't know what happened to her, but
It didn't end up amounting to much.
All right, Nisreen's telling us we gotta go.
All right.
Making the
the
rules.
bearer of bad news.
Alia, thank you so much for
This is
recommending
Thank
us
you for
this
having
book.
us.
Yeah, like I don't think we all loved it, but it definitely made for a really good
Yeah,
conversation.
do it again,
Yeah.
please. Give
Yeah,
us more
please.
recommendations. Come back on the
Oh
show.
God, I don't think you'll be liking the rest of my romance.
Well, now you know how we'll react,
recommendations.
so maybe it'll be
Yeah.
helpful.
Yeah.
All right, thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you for having me.
Rapid fire review veteran Greg David comes on to show us all how it's done. Stick around, we'll be right back. You're listening to AMI Audiobook Review. Welcome back to AMI Audiobook Review. I'm Jacob Szymanski here with Ramya Amuthan. And before we get to Rapid Fire Review with Greg David, Rams, can you go through the homepage of the CELA website?
Can do. All right, these are the 3 featured titles that are up there for now. These do get changed around every couple of weeks. And to find them, you go to celalibrary.ca. That's the Center for Equitable Library Access's website. The Fury is the first title. It is by Alex Michaelides, and this is suspense and thrillers. Unbroken is the second title by Angela Starrett, and this is Indigenous Peoples in Canada category and a Canadian biography. Also, The Bee Sting by Paul Murray, which is serious and literary fiction.
Perfect. Thank you. And it serves repeating that CELA is the Center for Equitable Library Access. They provide books to Canadians with disabilities in accessible formats. Print, Braille, what else? What other formats do they have?
They've got Daisy Audio. They have Daisy Disc if you want things delivered to you. They've got e-Daisy, ebooks, and Braille. They also have human narration as well as synthetic audio. There's just so much out there. It's all accessible.
Yeah, and they have good guides on how to access everything too on their website. Like I think the way both you and I do it, Ramya, is we use their website to get stuff directly to our players. I use Voice Dream Reader and you use Easy Reader?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, so you have options when you go there, but they have a massive library. Awesome service. And something that's really cool on CELA is they actually identify if something is synthetic audio or human narrated,
Yep,
which
you
I've
get
never
to
seen that
choose.
anywhere else. Yeah, you get to choose.
You get to choose.
It's pretty cool. Greg, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. Are you aware that you were our first participant of Rapid Fire Review?
Well, yes and no. I mean, yes, I was aware, and clearly I didn't mess it up too badly the first time because I'm back to do it again.
Well, you're the, person who kind of kickstarted this whole thing. Like now we're in such demand for rapid fire review. We're turning people away every week. We're like, no,
Wow.
guys, no. We can't do rapid fire review again. Not 2 in a row.
That's
but
not
yeah.
even an exaggeration. It's
Yeah,
true.
seriously.
You did it once, and we said, okay, we need to do this all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and when you asked me to come back, I thought, wow, have I actually read 5 books since we last chatted? And yes, it turns out that I've had.
Thank
I've
goodness.
I've read more than 5 books. So yeah,
You
happy
kind of
to
tell
do
people
this.
that you're a serious bookworm, so that's good.
Yeah, as long as they're good books.
Yeah, we got
Yeah.
the right man for the job.
But full transparency, are all the books that we're going to talk about you read in print?
Yes, they are. Yes.
All right. Okay.
All right, perfect. Let's get started. Quick reminder, rapid fire review. Greg provided to us 5 books ahead of time of his most recent notable reads. We're going to go through them one by one. Greg has 15 seconds to review each book one at a time. And once we get through all 5 books, Greg, you get to choose one to further elaborate on, whether you want to rant or rave, whatever you want to do. You have the platform. You ready?
I am ready. Yes, let's do it.
All right, Ramya, kick it off.
Oh, okay. Here we go. The first book you want to get into is Skinning the Coyote by Nick McAnulty.
Yeah, Nick McAnulty. Wow, great start. He's a Canadian author and filmmaker who's written for Murdoch Mysteries on CBC, and he has taken the Western and monster mythology genres and mixed them together in this novel about a former sheriff and his deputy. Wow.
Rough.
Group.
You want to finish that sentence, though?
Sure. They're taking a convicted killer across the country, and they run into a monster along the way.
Whoa.
Okay.
Western and monster mythology.
Whoa.
That's a crazy crossover.
Yep.
Holy
Oh,
smokes.
I'm
Okay,
so
that sounds
curious.
wild.
Okay.
Okay, next one. The Wager, A Tale of Shipwreck, Mutiny, and Murder by David Grant.
Yeah, this is a nonfiction book which covers the Wager, which was found shipwrecked in 1742. 30 of its crew were discovered, and they told an awful story about mutiny and murder. And David Gann also wrote The Killers of the Flower Moon, which was recently adapted into the Oscar-nominated film.
That sounds
Nice.
sick. I love nautical fiction, although this is nonfiction, but
Right.
yo.
Is this a typical realm for you, Greg? This kind of book?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
love historical nonfiction stuff. Yeah, absolutely. If it's shipwrecks, if it's something to do with the Canadian North, I'm totally into it.
All right. Okay, let's move on to Black Tudors, The Untold Story by Miranda Kaufman.
Yeah, so this nonfiction book traces the history of 10 people from Africa and their life and times during the Tudor and Stuart eras in England, and includes the story of John Blank, who was the royal trumpeter for Henry VIII.
John Blank?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you
Yeah.
insert his name, please?
It's interesting that you brought that up, Jacob, because that's a big part of his
this-
story.
Oh, is it?
how
Okay.
how he ended up with that name in the first place, and whether it was kind of a take on the word black. Really
Oh,
Wow.
fascinating look, because not everybody who was black during that time was a slave, and so they had important parts. They were part of British society at that time. So really interesting book.
Cool. All right, following up with the next one, Thames Mudlarking.
Yeah, so this is a tracing of the history of London, England, through mudlarking, which is when you walk along the shore of the River Thames at low tide and you're finding discarded items. And this book traces the items that have been found from prehistoric times right through to modern day.
Oh,
And that was by Jason Sandy and Nick Stevens.
Exactly. Thanks.
Mhm.
okay. That concept alone, I have so many follow-up questions. All right. Last one, right? Yep. This one is called My Effin' Life by Geddy Lee.
Yeah, so Geddy Lee, he's a lead singer and bass player for Rush, and this is his memoir about his life, about his parents, and the fact that they were in concentration camps during the Second World War. Traces the history of Rush right through to the death of Neil Peart.
Sounds like a
Okay.
Canadian must-read. You feel like Rush, bass, history? That
Yeah.
sounds awesome.
Yep.
Which one do you want to expand on, Greg?
Oh wow! I mean, I did have one in mind, but based on your comments, maybe we should do Skinning the Coyote.
Okay.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. And then we might get to the second one as well.
Okay,
We'll
sure.
see.
Yeah, so Skinning the Coyote is really interesting because, like I said, it mixes the Western and the monster mythology series together. It really kind of reminded me of the film Aliens and Cowboys, or Cowboys and Aliens from years and years ago. But this is all about a sheriff and his former deputy. They've both been disgraced, and now they're kind of bounty hunters. And what they do is they ride into this town. They take custody of this young man, a gunfighter who's been accused of murder, and so they take him into custody, and they're taking him to justice in a town that's I think it's a couple hundred miles away. And along the way, of course, their adventure is fraught. The gunslinger attempts to get away, and they run into a couple of serial killers along the way. There's also a rival gang that is trying to get their hands on the gunslinger and get him to this town so that they can claim the bounty that's on his head. But along the way, overshadowing everything is this creature. And we're first introduced to this creature right off the top of the book when it attacks a family. And so I knew going in that this was going to be the major showdown, and that it was all going to come together and culminate in this monster face off in this small town. And I'm a huge fan of the horror genre. Stephen King, he can be very horrific, but he can also be very romantic and write straight up, kind of fantasy novels as well. So I love his stuff. There have been some books over the years that I've read that of the horror genre that I really like as well. And this one was just a really cool combination. And the reason I found out about it is because I actually follow the author on Twitter, and he said, "Hey, I've got this new book out. Check it out." And that was before Christmas. And I messaged him and said, "Yeah, this is right up my alley." And it's a quick read. There isn't a heck of a lot of character development. It's pretty straightforward. It's under 300 pages in the printed book, and yeah, it's just there's humor, there's gore, there's blood. Like I said, there's the westerns and there's monsters. So I was really, really blown away by the book. Read it, in a couple of days over the Christmas holidays, and loved it.
We're like minorly obsessed with talking about genres and genre specifications and subgenres and marrying different genres together. So what would you call this?
Let's see if it says on the back of the book, if it says it. No,
Yeah.
It doesn't say specifically, but remember when Pride and Prejudice and Vampires came out like several years ago? It's kind of like, I don't know what I'd call this. I think that I would call this a horror novel, but it's got,
Novel
like I
is a
said,
genre now?
Well,
Shake my
okay.
head.
Let's say horror then, if you're just looking for straight up, because I think that's what it is. If you're tuning in, if you're picking up the book, you're listening to the book, and you're expecting something romantic in there, it's not going to be in there. This is a shoot 'em up with blood and gore attached to it. So I would say horror if you wanted to paint me into a corner.
But it's a Western too, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah, because
But
the
is that more of
setting
a
is
setting? Exactly.
yeah,
Okay.
it's the setting
Oh,
for
no,
sure.
I disagree. I think that's a genre for sure. It is a
Oh, it
setting,
is
but there's
definitely
also
a genre.
tropes of Western-y-ness, right? Like, is it more Western with a touch of horror or horror with a touch of Western?
I think it's equal parts. I mean,
Okay.
overshadowing the whole book is the horror. So I would say, and it's violent horror as well, and shocking horror. So yeah, I mean, we're allowed to do the dash, right? Like we can say Western dash horror, can't we? Can't we agree on that? Why do we need to
Sure.
pigeonhole everything?
Yeah,
All
yeah,
right,
we
there we
don't.
go.
Oh, like
I'll
trust
allow
me.
it.
But
Don't
yeah.
pressure me.
Well, if it doesn't say it in the back of the book,
No,
But
it does not say in the
we have
back of
to
the book.
do our best, exactly. But no, when I said like Western is more of the setting, I just thought of this book, but I agree that Western is its own.
Oh, okay. I see what you're
You know
saying.
what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's so huge. Western is definitely its own kind of realm, if you will. You compared it to Stephen King. We know you're a major fan of Stephen King, but the writing, is it as good?
Ooh.
Are you enjoying this author for writing's sake?
Yeah, I did like it. It's funny, now that I'm sitting here and thinking about it, it very much reads like a screenplay. Like
Huh.
I said, there isn't a lot of character development. There isn't a lot of kind of backstory. It's very much kind of the engine is the action that's happening, and that's driving the book forward. And I do like books that do that. I am fine with character development, but this one isn't a lot like that. So it kind of chugs along like a screenplay. Like as I was reading it, I could picture in my mind, oh yeah, this would make sense as like a limited run series on TV, like HBO, or it could be an indie film, shot in and around Toronto and
Right.
Hamilton.
Yeah, I think we can't help ourselves from doing that nowadays, especially because I find that books nowadays they come off more and more like a screenplay.
Is it because they're waiting for the adaptation?
Maybe they're hoping for an
Yeah.
adaptation as they write it, or definitely because you know that these authors nowadays watch TV too. They watch TV and
And it's a hit if
they
your thing
pander to the
becomes a TV.
sensibilities.
Right.
Yeah, I would agree with both of you on that. I think that writers nowadays think about that, and that's where the big money is. The big money is in that screenplay, that TV adaptation, or that film adaptation. Like as much as the big names in the book world, pull in a lot of money in their contracts. It's all about the adaptations that really put money into people's pockets, especially if you're, kind of a middle of the road author that might not have, the cachet of some of the big name authors.
Can't it be a bit of a turnoff though? Like to read something and as you say, reflect back and think, yeah, it kind of reads like a screenplay. And you, Jacob, saying that nowadays a lot of books read like screenplays. Does it take away from some kind of essence from it being a book?
I mean, it doesn't. I'll let Jacob speak as well, but for me, no. I mean, because for every book that reads like a screenplay to me, there's a bunch that aren't. So yeah, I mean, it doesn't bother me at all.
I think when you read like classic literature, you'll know what we mean because those books, think of like The Great Gatsby and Catcher in the Rye, stuff like that. Like those books were definitely not written with TV or movies in mind because one, I find there's fewer dialogue and much more like introspective monologues. And
That's what I
characters talking
wondered
to
if
themselves,
it
and a
was
lot more
missing.
literary, flowery exposition and descriptions that kind of tell a story instead of descriptions that push the story along. Like I think there's a difference there.
Definitely.
Yeah, I'm glad that you actually brought that up because there's one movie that I'm really looking forward to and one that I just watched recently, and the one that I just watched recently was called The Voyage of the Demeter, which is mentioned in a few pages in the Dracula novel, because Dracula spends time on this ship, and they ended up taking a few pages out of the Dracula novel and turning it into a whole movie about the backstory of the people on the ship that were
Mm-hmm.
being dispatched by this vampire during his journey. So that one was really cool. And the one that I'm really looking forward to, even though the Frankenstein, story has been told so many times, Guillermo del Toro is the latest one to do the adaptation of the modern Prometheus, which is the Frankenstein. And they're filming that right now in Toronto. And I'm so excited
Oh,
about
cool.
that movie. As many times as I've read the book and seen other adaptations, I'm really looking forward to this one.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I will say another thing that you will notice in books that came out nowadays that make them seem like a screenplay is every chapter seems to finish with like a cliffhanger.
Yeah. Yeah.
It feels like it's meant to be the end of an episode. And
Yeah.
there are more like moments like that feel like,
Yeah.
ooh, that would really go really well in a TV show. And just more dialogue in general. And like cliches that you see in TV shows too. Like lines of dialogue that are just repeated all the time.
I know it's just the times we live in, right? Like we've already said, once your book becomes a hit, or once your book becomes a screen adaptation, it's a hit. But I still think that you're kind of cheating if you're writing for it to become a TV hit. And that's why I was wondering about that. Like, what is it missing if it's not meant to be written that way, with TV in mind, with screens in mind, and as you guys said, describing as if it's instructions for TV, rather than, just description for the sake of description. I'm not necessarily complaining. I'm just curious about what it means for the essence of the book, especially internal monologue and thought.
Right. And I think books like that are much more difficult to adapt if everything is
Of
internal.
course.
Because like when you're making a movie, what they always say is like show, don't tell. But a book is the exact opposite.
Absolute opposite. Yeah, and part of the creativity of taking a book and making it a screenplay is that, right? Is dealing with a different medium. But if authors are just like, here's my screenplay that I published as a book, it feels a little different. I'm reading the autobiography of Malcolm X, and every time I bring it up to somebody anecdotally, most people have responded with, oh yeah, I checked out the movie and that was great. And this is a really long book. It's an entire lifetime of journeys. And I guess you can think of it I think of it similarly to, Gone with the Wind and things like that, where you have to adapt something like this to a movie. You're taking years and years and years of stories, which would be easy enough to do a memoir or biography, especially with some, the amount of things that someone like Malcolm X has gone through. But is it that a movie would stick more than a book? Because even the people who've read the book seem to recommend the movie. Greg, have you read or watched either?
Yeah, when you were saying that, it reminded me of Roots, which just celebrated an anniversary. Roots, the saga of an American family, written by Alex Haley. And I remember I read the miniseries came out when I was too young, so I had not seen that. But I read the book, and then I went back and watched it. And there's a prime example. I mean, they weren't able to fit everything that was in the book
Mm-hmm.
into even the miniseries. So I think that there's a great example of, you can't fit it all in. You try your best, and you get those big the certain storylines in there, but you can't get it all in. And that's a fantastic book. If you haven't read Roots, it's wonderful. I loved it. I think I read it when I was 12 or 13, like a jaded teen, and I loved it.
Well, we've been talking about the process of adapting books into movies and TV shows a lot recently in the past couple episodes. And Greg, I think you're the perfect person to bring in on this conversation. Do you have any examples of movies or TV shows that were adapted from books that were not well done adaptations, or examples that were especially good?
Wow, that's a great question. And I always feel like, because the first ones that jump to mind are Stephen King, which is awful because, honest folks, I read other books, okay? But there have been so many stories written about good and bad adaptations of Stephen King novels.
Sure.
And I
And they're
remember there
both
was
so big. Usually both
yeah.
versions are
I
huge.
feel like when you take on a name like that, or any big name, you're going to be criticized on the source material. And I remember that the original Salem's Lot miniseries that starred the late David Soul back in the 70s, I remember being unimpressed by that, but the book scared me, like legitimately scared me, where I turn off the lights at night and I was afraid to
Mm.
go to sleep.
The
But the
book was scarier than the TV show?
yeah, man. And that's because
Wow.
the miniseries was made for ABC. So you can't get away with half of the stuff, that you can in a book.
Right.
But on the other hand, Misery, which I thought was a middling book, it was okay,
What?
was a fantastic movie. I thought that
Oh.
Kathy Bates and James Caan just elevated the book to another level on the big screen.
That's a great take. I 100% agree with that. I thought the book was mid to good. More than anything, that
Yeah.
book was just long. And
I loved that it was long.
it felt...
But the thing that annoyed me about that book is because Stephen King was writing the chapters, the Misery book within the book, so it was a book within a book,
Yeah.
and those pages
That's true.
annoyed me. They felt to me like they were filler. Now, obviously, they weren't, because it was furthering that story, and the fact that this diehard fan had taken Paul Sheldon, the author, had kidnapped him and wanted him to write this book. So I
It was
understood it.
essential, yeah.
Yeah, it was essential. You're absolutely right, but I just found that the movie, because it didn't have any of that, it was just, there was way more meat to the movie than there was in there was just a lot of fat that I thought could have been trimmed.
And this goes back to that concept of like what books make for good movies, or like why would they make for great screen adaptations. And I think Misery is just a perfect example of that. The concept of Misery on its face would, I think, make for a great movie. And then if it's done well with the talent, with the producers and the direction, it would, and it has obviously come out to be a popular movie. I'm just curious, Pet Sematary, was that made into a movie?
Yeah, it was made into a movie twice. And I didn't see this. I didn't see the second one, which came out a few years ago. But the book, again, really, really scary. I read all of these books when I was like in my teens, so I didn't sleep a lot. But I found that the book was terrifying to me because of what was happening in that book. And then I found again that the movie just didn't add up. And I think part of it, and I'd love to hear what you both think about this, is part of the mind's eye. You can picture something way more horrific in your head than they could probably create on the screen, the smaller the big screen for you.
100%. 100%. There are things that you can't even necessarily explain, but the psychological effect as you go through the book is just so eerie, and it sits with you, and you're picking it up and putting it down and then sitting with it. And I think that's part of the world of books compared to a 2-hour, movie that you're just sitting watching and it's done.
And since we're talking about Stephen King and horror, I'd argue that you can make specifically gore much more harrowing in a book than you can in a movie.
Yeah.
Because we've been very visually desensitized to gore and violence in TV shows. Like, blood does not faze us. But in a book, you can be much more descriptive. And if you describe it as being like a horrific act of violence, you can kind of picture it in the way that you perceive horrific.
Yeah, absolutely. And while you were talking about that, Jacob, the other book that popped into my head with regard to a movie is One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest by Ken Kesey. Now, I saw the movie before I read the book, and the movie was made famous by Jack Nicholson's performance. And so reading the book, I could only picture Jack Nicholson in that lead role, and of playing McMurphy.
Must have been a good performance.
Right.
Yeah, fantastic performance. And the movie was amazing, but it influenced what I was picturing in my mind when I was reading the book after the fact. And
Did it work though?
I was just going to say, I think it did work, but it also hurt things for me, because in the book, McMurphy is Irish and he has flaming red hair, and they describe his freckles. That isn't Jack Nicholson. Jack Nicholson, dark shock of hair, kind of pasty pale, furrowed brow. So very different physically from the description in the book to the movie. So it did affect things for me. And it took a little bit away from the book because I was picturing Jack Nicholson in that role as I read the novel.
Yep. See, and this kind of thing happens way too often. The details, right? The details of descriptions and characters and physicality, where when something hits the screens, people are a little more liberal, including the authors who kind of sign off and say, "Yeah, okay, it's fine. Just use Emma Watson for Hermione." And then people are like, that's not it."
Yeah.
But if you didn't read the books and you're just keen on the movies, then fine. But if you do exactly what you did, Greg, where you watch the movie, the screen version, and then try to go back to the book, I think it can feel kind of confusing.
Yeah, and for that Harry Potter casting, I mean, that cast that plagued them throughout that very first movie, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome, Greg. Thank you so much. Surely we're going to have you on for a third time. You're going to be leading the leaderboards for most appearances, I have no doubt.
Awesome. I better get reading more books. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, let us know when you've had 5 under your belt, okay?
Okay.
Greg David is the communications specialist at AMI. That's it for today, Rams.
That's it. Next week, you're not here, Jacob. So we're going back to the good old days.
Hey, whoa.
I'm sorry.
Hey.
Sorry, just kidding. Going back to like season 1, season 2 feels with Nisreen and I. It's going to be fun. We have Caroline Bordeaux joining us for another RFR Rapid Fire review. So we'll see what she's been reading lately. She's a member of Amir Khan's book club, monthly book club as well, and an avid audiobook listener. So that'll be fun. And of course, Nisreen and I will talk books together.
Mm-hmm.
And we want your feedback.
The good old times.
The good old times. Exactly. That's what I said. We want your feedback. Call us 1-866-509-4545 to leave us your reviews of the show, comments, or anything on topics that we've discussed.
Anything. Please. We want to hear from you.
Yep.
That's 1-866-509-4545. Or you can leave us an email at feedback@ami.ca.